Hello, I'm Kamla. My guest today is Tom Quinn. He's a filmmaker from Pennsylvania whose new film, Colewell, is premiering at the 2019 San Francisco International Film Festival. Prior to this, Tom had directed a film called The New Year Parade, which won him a string of awards. Welcome to San Francisco.
Thank you.
When was the first time you came to San Francisco?
Oh, the first time I came to San Francisco was on my honeymoon, not long after we did the New Year Parade.
Oh, okay.
And so we were here, and then we went up to Napa, then we went down to Big Sur for about 10 days. And then I was back for Skywalker Sound last summer. So.
Because you worked with Skywalker Sound for Colewell. Okay. You are a filmmaker who's also a teacher.
Yeah.
You teach where?
I teach at Drexel University in Philadelphia. I'm also the program director for the film and television program.
At Drexel?
At Drexel.
Okay, but you went to school in Temple?
I went to school, I did undergrad at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, and then I went back and did grad school at Temple University.
So one of the things I heard from somebody who lived in Philadelphia is that Temple University has a pretty good film school.
They do. Their graduate program at Temple University was very focused on, it came out of a documentary tradition, and so they were mixed on like doc fiction hybrids. And so a lot of the narrative work also had a documentary component, which I had sort of been doing already before I even got to Temple. So for me, it was a really good fit. I had a good group of peers, and there were very good filmmakers in town that have stayed since then.
Okay, so Colewell, is that a real name or a
Colewell is a fictional town that's sort of a combination of several towns. We probably visited 22 towns before we started shooting. And they had a lot of similar themes and ideas. There was initially a town called Colebrook that I was looking at. And I liked that history of coal being sort of buried in there, even though it was spelled differently. There was a sense of like where that name probably came from. And so when we were writing, it felt like it made sense to come up with something fictional to sort of be able to combine the best of a lot of these places' stories.
So you chose San Francisco as your site for premiering the film. Why?
The San Francisco premiere was exciting for us for a couple of reasons. For one, they have this launch program where they bring in buyers, they put us in this beautiful theater at the Dolby Theater, so we know it would look amazing and sound amazing, and we're near Skywalker Sound, who we had worked with a lot. We have a lot of friends there that we wanted to come down and see the film. And we just knew, the festival has a great reputation. We knew the audience would be a good fit, and so I think all of those things together just sounded like a great premiere.
The film, I watched the film and I had not read the production notes. So the two words that sprung in my mind were poetic and an ode to a rural life in America that we no longer get to see that much. And then I read your production notes and those are the two words that jump out. I'm like, wow, I read this filmmaker's mind. It's very hard to evoke such emotions in a filmgoer's mind. How did you, it's very hard to nudge us to think in such way, especially melancholia.
Sure.
How do you invoke, what devices did you use to create that sense when we are watching the film? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. I think one thing I did on this film, which I had never done before, is before I wrote the script or even wrote a treatment, I made a document where I told myself the story in images. And so it was a mix of painting and photography, and I sort of told the whole storyline.
So your storyboard was actually documented as a film?
Before, I never shot it, but I did it as like a document, and so I kind of told myself the story with just pictures, and there were things I was trying to trigger and wake up in the audience emotionally or thematically that I felt like they were more purely cinematic. It wasn't really just about the narrative. It was like I liked the idea of these images next to these images. And it felt a certain way. And then the trick was, as we got into writing and choosing our cinematographer and production designer, like how to hold on to all of those things. But there was a sense of poetry that I really wanted in the movie. And our cinematographer Paul Yee and our production designer Alan Lampert, I think they really pulled those pieces out and helped. At the same time, there was a lot of work in the edit then to try and preserve that and hold on to that. And our editor Darren Navarro, who I worked with, and then I cut as well, we would sort of pass it back and forth, just trying to figure out like the right balance between the narrative storyline and the story of this town, but also this more poetic storyline about this woman retiring and just like realizing where she's at in life and how much time has passed that she didn't really, understood that happened. It just kind of went by. And so I think.
So what is that line, the opening line?
The line that opens the film is from Ella, who's like a younger woman in the film who's been hitchhiking, and she says that she heard a line from a trucker who said that no matter how old you are, life always feels the same length, like it's forever and not very long. And
how did you get that line, forever and not very long? Because it depends where in your life you're standing and looking back. Your perspective, it seems forever maybe if you're sick.
Right, yeah.
And for not long is if you're having a good time.
Right, I think something I think about a lot, and I think it's something that I had felt a few different times.
Are you melancholic?
Am I melancholy? Sometimes. There's a part of me that is. I mean, I'm a fairly happy person too, but I think about time passing a lot, and it's something I've always been afraid of, and so I think a lot of it comes out in the work. And I always felt that way, which is like, when you're 10 years old, 5 years feels a certain way, and yet now being in my 40s, 20 years, I'm amazed that it feels pretty similar to what 5 years might have felt like at 10. It feels very fast. And I've been feeling like no matter how old I get, that the proportions feel the same. I don't know that I necessarily feel like I've lived longer. And the same way that when you look back when you're 20, 5 years feels like so long ago. Before high school, it feels like this long time period. And now 5 years doesn't feel very long at all. And since I teach, I watch these groups come through, and they go from freshman to senior year so quickly. From the outside, when you're watching them, it's like, oh, they're done just like that. And when you're in it, it feels like this real journey. And so I think, that line that's in the film is something I just posted to friends on like Facebook once. Like, is this how it feels like to you? This is how it feels like to me. And then when I was writing the film, I remembered that, and I kind of just worked it into the dialogue.
Before we go to the film itself, I wanted to find out who are some of the influences, film makers that influenced you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I got a sense of a Scandinavian tinge there.
It's probably true. I mean, not as consciously, but I think in some of the cinematography, certainly. We talked about, Bergman and but I think for me, when I was in college, I was trying to figure out what kind of films I wanted to make. John Sayles was probably one of the most important influences on me, because he was making films about communities and about a lot of times working class people, which is like the world I was in, and to see that on screen was really important to me, because I never knew I could make movies like that. And then I think later on there were people like Gus Van Sant, and he made Milk and Good Will Hunting, but he also made a series of films that's kind of called his Death Trilogy, which are these very influenced by slow cinema. They're like long takes. They're more minimalist storylines. And so a lot of those ideas I was really excited about. And then, but also mixed with that is like, I still love Spielberg, and I think there's like this weird mix in the movie that was actually hard to edit.
That's why you got Karen Allen.
Yeah, it is part of it, in that there are these dolly moves in the film that are like more from those influences mixed with other things that are more, art cinema, and it was actually kind of hard in the edit at first to get all of those different ideas to sit together and to see, trying to figure out what my films feel like, because they do come from a mix.
Yeah, the mix is evident, because when she goes to the chicken coop, and that reminds me of Scandinavian films.
Yeah, exactly, yep.
So there were some touches, that's why I said tinge.
Yep, for sure.
And then some of them reminded me of old Hollywood movies, the opening scene where you show in the old films, that's how they showed the kitchen and everything.
No, exactly. I think I was kind of on a John Ford binge for a couple of years there. I was watching a lot of John Ford, and I think similarly, communities and people who are working class trying to figure out the bigger picture of their lives, and I think I've always been drawn to those stories. And so, and I also love Jem Cohen, who's a filmmaker who kind of mixes doc and narrative work and essay work, and so they're all very different stylistically, or what world of cinema they're in, but the kinds of stories they tell are pretty common. I think that's what I'm most excited about, and then trying to figure out, okay, well, what's my work look like or feel like is then the next step of that.
So it took you a long time to make your second film.
It did, yeah.
Why?
It was a combination. The New Year Parade was made for $7,000, and I was in my late 20s, and so I could just kind of blow what was in my bank account, and we shot for 3 years. So,
but you were everything,
yeah,
excepting the talent.
I had one crew member named Mark Doyle who would do lighting and sound for me, and then I would shoot and also light, and then some days if Mark couldn't make it, I would do sound as well. And we were a really small team, really tight-knit, and Mark was really important in that. But we would just shoot over the course of 3 years, and like if we had weekend time free, we'd all shoot. And that model was really great and really fun. And then that film got more attention than I expected it to get. And by the end of it, I was kind of broke because I was in grad school, I wasn't working, and we were spending money on the film. And, by my early 30s, I was married at that point. I couldn't just blow even $5,000, which is a lot of money when you're, getting on your feet. So I didn't know how to make another film. Like the model I had figured out suddenly didn't work anymore. And so I went into visual effects producing for a while just because I needed a job, and I was working with a lot of good friends and producing visual effects, which was new to me. And I enjoyed it, but it's sort of the kind of job that really takes over your whole life, and it was hard to make work. And I had a script I was writing that I couldn't get any traction on. And so I think it just took a while to figure out what kind of work I was trying to make, and I didn't really have a network because we worked so small, which was really gratifying, but I hadn't really built a larger team. And so going into the next movie, I didn't have producers who could raise money, and I had friends that were trying to help me do it, who helped me with the New Year Parade, but I didn't have like that bigger support system. And so I think it took a while to find that, and to find the confidence really to make a leap of like working with a bigger team and like really trying to do it a certain way and seeing myself that way that I could do it, I think was part of what held me back.
How did you get Karen Allen?
Karen, I had our associate producer is a woman named Marianne Fernsler who was developing the film with me early on. And we were going through all these different actors and trying to figure out somebody who we hadn't seen in this kind of movie. And she finally said, well, what about Karen Allen? And I got really excited because I saw that Karen, for one, had just done a movie called Bad Hurt at that time that was at Tribeca, and I saw some clips from that. And then I also saw a news piece on Karen Allen Fiber Arts, which is her shop in Great Barrington, where she was like working on the loom and then like out with people. And I was like, oh, well, that's kind of our movie. And so I wrote her a letter, and I sent her the script. And a week later, I was walking into class to teach, and I got a call from Massachusetts, and she just wanted to get coffee, and she liked the script, and she liked my last film, and I drove up to get coffee, and we just kind of really hit it off.
You drove up from
Philadelphia to Great Barrington, and so it's about a 4-hour drive.
So you just jumped into the car for a cup of coffee?
Yeah, it was basically like yeah, I did. I told her, I was like, I'll be in the area, which I wasn't going to be. And
you had learned the parlance of business.
Exactly. I just wanted to meet her in person, and I felt like, I was really excited about the idea of her in that role for a lot of different reasons. I think she's always a person, even in those films people know the most, like whether it's Raiders of the Lost Ark or even Starman.
I call it the Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, of course. And so I think
and Animal House.
And Animal House and Starman and
yeah, with Jeff Bridges.
Yep. And
she's acted with all the top actors.
She has, and she's fantastic, and she's like strong, but she also has vulnerability in her, and she's like warm, and I just felt like for a slow, quiet portrait film that I wanted to do, I needed somebody with like gravity. I need somebody that like the audience will watch sort mail and like but that character work will come through that. So I really wanted someone who had like a movie star quality, but also I needed to be able to put them in a small town and have them be believable. And I felt like Karen's living that life. She knows that life.
So did she say yes?
She did. She said,
Where did you get your coffee?
We went, there's a coffee shop in Great Barrington, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment.
Oh, it was not a Starbucks or a Pete's?
No, it wasn't Starbucks. They have a nice little place in Great Barrington that like the community is all kind of out at, which is great. And I remember I was outside the coffee shop and I was very nervous. I got there like an hour early, and
like every good director.
Right. And all of a sudden it started flurrying. It was like the first snow of the season. And then I saw Karen coming down crossing the street. Like all happened at once. I was like, what is this? I'm in a movie. And And we just hit it off, and we just felt very comfortable, and I felt like she understood a small community story. And she's telling about like, like another coffee shop that turned into a hardware store where everybody would meet every day. And so I think, she got it right off the bat, and I think that was important to me.
So we've been circling around the film and everything, but let's talk about the film itself.
Sure.
How would you describe the film to someone who has never seen it?
I think I think of it as a poetic portrait of this woman who's not ready for a massive change in her life, and yet it's happening anyway. And she's trying to figure out how to face that and what decisions to make out of that, and also even just how to accept that it's happening, that that's where she is.
Why did you want to make such a film?
I think the reasons for making it changed over time. And I think a lot of times you're drawn to things for one reason, and then you get into it and you're like, oh, that's actually why I'm here. And initially I had a friend who started telling me about his town growing up that's no longer on the map because the woman who ran their post office out of her home retired, and so they closed the post office down, and then they lost their zip code, and so they lost their town name. And basically
that can happen?
That can happen. And so I thought that was fascinating, that this woman retired and so the town vanished in a way.
And lost its zip code.
Lost its zip code. And it happens in very small towns that don't have other indicators. So if they have a town hall or they have even a historic site, then a lot of times it won't happen. They'll still keep their name and their zip code.
Is there a definition for a town?
I don't know that there is, and it seems like state by state they handle it differently.
Fascinating.
And I think now with like digital maps, it's easier to keep more things on a map. But at one point when they were making analog paper maps, certain areas would get very crowded, and if they didn't have an indicator anymore, they would just kind of remove some of them because they were so small. They might have 800 or 900 people or 2,000 people, and if they didn't have any real indicators, they would just kind of lump it with the next town.
So towns disappear from map?
They can. I think
this is shocking, doesn't even begin to describe what you just told me. I didn't know this could happen.
Yeah, and I think they try to do it less often now that you can have a digital map and it's easier to preserve everyone. But I'd have to fact check, but I think it was it Atlanta that dropped 500 names in like around 2009? So it happens quite a bit. And so Pennsylvania tries to not do it as often from what I've been told, but it felt like it was initially the thing that grabbed my attention. And it was part of the storyline. We dropped it by the time we got into production because we realized once we were in it, it was much more about her and much less about the town. But at the research stage, it was a really interesting piece. And then I took it to a program called the Venice Biennale College, which is part of the Venice Film Festival and the Venice Biennale, where they develop micro-budget films, and we had mentors, and at one point you have to lay out your storyline with props on a table just to kind of talk it out. And so I did it, and I got done, and our mentor said, well, this is a very lonely table. Is this about loneliness? And I was like, no, I think it's about, and I just got all choked up, and I couldn't really talk at that point. And anytime I would talk about it after that, like that would sort of happen again, and started to realize that, this mix of being afraid of change and a certain kind of way of isolating yourself.
So the slow alienation.
Yeah, exactly. And a self, one that's coming out of your own choices a lot of times.
She didn't even know that her own choices would lead to such a change, I think.
I don't think so, because I think in the beginning of the film she's alone, but she's not lonely. People come to see her every day, and she's kind of set up her whole life to sort of have that balance in a nice way. I think she likes her quiet time, but every day for a couple hours, everybody's filling up her home and talking, and so I think she has built a life to keep that separate, but also to keep it in balance. And then that other piece goes away. And I think she doesn't, there's a different kind of vulnerability that it takes to go knock on someone's door versus having them come to you and have a role and a purpose in their life that's very clear cut. And so I think I think that throws her.
Share with us a little bit about Paul Yee, your DP.
Yep. So Paul Yee is a cinematographer based in New York. He had shot a film called The Fits. And The Fits had gone through the Biennale College a few years before we did. And so I knew the film because of that. And there were things it's a beautiful film, and he's got these great portraits of faces in it, but also There was mixing some non-actors in, and he really captured them in a beautiful way. And you could just tell there's like a sense of empathy and a sense of loving people. You can just kind of tell through the lensing sometimes. And so we met, and one of my producers, Craig Shilowich, is good friends with Paul as well. And I asked him, like, what do you think of Paul? And he's like, oh, Paul's fantastic, and I think you'll really hit it off together. And we did. We just kind of could see eye to eye, and he's very similar temperament. And we would look at photography together, and I think, you know, we're both excited about the same things. And so it just felt like a good match.
My final question is, now that you're a filmmaker of not 1, 2 films, and you're also a teacher, what do you tell your students? You've got this experience of trying to raise money for 2 films.
Right.
You know, one was on a micro budget, and the second one you had some help.
I mean, we've been doing a case study in class, loose case study, like for the first 15 minutes of class since last September, where we just talk about where the film's at. And there are really good days, and there are really rough days, and I think it's important for them to see both. And what I try to tell them is, like, when they're making their work now, they all have moments where they lose hope, or they feel like they're doing things wrong, and some of them.
So self-doubt is part and parcel.
It's part of it, and I think, you're going to make mistakes, and things are going to go wrong. It's the nature of it, and you can't get too excited about the good days. You can't get too down about the bad days, and like, you have to believe that you can do it eventually, even if you don't feel like you can quite know how to do it right now. And I think that's the hardest part of making work, is staying in the game, and some of that's financial, but a big part of it is just self-confidence and belief that you can do it eventually.
I have someone in mind when I'm asking you this question, that someone in mind is behind the camera, and he wants to be making films.
Sure.
So I wonder what advice you would give him.
I mean, I often, for my students, I tell them the same thing, which is like, if you love it, you know you love it, first off. And I know the thing that I went through, and a lot of my friends went through, is you hear a lot about how filmmakers work at a certain level, and usually it's after they've made a few films. And when you're in school and you get out, or whatever point you decide you want to make work, there's an in-between that nobody really talks about, of just how to get on your feet and how to meet other people doing it. And so much of it ultimately has to come out of just making work in whatever way you can, whether it's on a phone or it doesn't really matter. Like the New Year Parade was almost all non-actors, and we got beautiful performances. But nobody will know what you can do until
So you have to bake that cake.
You have to make it, yeah. And I think you have to show what's inside of you. And I think people will respond to it. But it's hard to do it with a script, and it's hard to do it in conversation. They need to see the work. And I think it's also just going to make you better, and to understand you'll make mistakes. Like, my first film had certainly had mistakes, and I tried making a feature before that kind of, was a hot mess, and that's part of it too. That's okay. You just, like, it doesn't mean you're a bad filmmaker. It just means you're still learning how to do it. So.
I got the final signal there saying wrap up. Tom, we ran out of time. I could have asked you some more questions because you gave such beautiful answers, thoughtful answers. Truly appreciated.
Thank you.
Wish you all the best with Colewell.
Thank you.
And somebody asked me if it was Cole and Well, Coalwell.
Right. It's in there. I mean, it's a lot of the towns in Pennsylvania have Cole, Cole, but you can feel the history there. At some point, that was a verbal, an oral name that was passed down that somehow shifted, but you can feel the roots.
There's a lot of Welsh influence in Pennsylvania.
There is as well, yeah, and Polish and Irish. So
yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. If you missed any of our shows, you can catch them on our website. We'll be back again next week with another new conversation. Until then, goodbye.